Lady, and she says, "Oh no, you're in the wrong line. You got to go on that line." He goes, "All right." He goes to the other line, and he waits and he waits and he waits, and then he eventually gets up. And he says, "No, no, you're supposed to be in that line this whole time." He goes, "Are you kidding me? I've been waiting for so long. How dare you keep me waiting?" And immediately he lost it because he practiced presence the whole time alone.
Right.
He didn't have human beings to challenge him at all. And so that's what we do. We are the father who meditates every day from 9 to 10 a.m. And then his little daughter comes in and knocks on the door. Goes, "Stop it, don't you know I'm meditating right now?" And so when you isolate yourself and you try and make even meditation, nothing against formal meditation, obviously it's a beautiful practice, but when that becomes the only time, and then you go back to the world immediately, it's as if your mind in the pain body that we all carry, it knows that time. Okay, don't bother him when they're doing that. And as soon as you're done, you go back to the world and immediately you re-identify with the voice in the head and the emotions and the story that we had. And so, like he said too, with the idea that we elevate each other is obviously is. If I came in here today and I just only knew in my mind, I said, okay, I can do this. I can do this talk. I know what to say, the content. There would be no emanation of the actual state of consciousness that we're talking about. So it takes sitting up here and accepting that I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know what I'm going to say, because or else it won't be genuine. And when one person enters the state of presence where the mind still thinks, but you don't believe that thinking is who you are. And then you know yourself as the background consciousness, that there's the consciousness here, there's thinking. Well, if I'm thinking, then who knows I'm thinking, right? So your body changes, your mind changes. But what knows that those changes are happening doesn't change, never changes. The constant background, it's silence or stillness, spaciousness. Some call it God, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it, but when we enter that state, it's as if it opens up room for other people. It's very interesting because a few thousand years ago, Buddha came around, and at the same time as Buddha, Lao Tzu was coming up from the Tao Te Ching. And at the same time around Greece, there was the pre-Socratic philosophers who were talking about the same thing. So it seemed as if a few thousand years ago, there was a huge wave hit the planet almost. And all of a sudden, these people started waking up. Exactly, yeah, there was no connection. And it's the same thing with herbalism across the board. All these people are same realizations. And then it seems, okay, maybe it's shut down. And then this person told that person, they didn't get it. Even Buddha, he was said to give a silent sermon where he held up a flower.
A lotus flower.
Yeah, he just silently. Yeah, and only one person understood the teaching.
Smile.
Yep.
And that is the myth of the transference of Zen.
Yeah, that Zen was that smile or that realization being passed down.
So, if you don't mind, since it has to do with
absolutely.
So if you'll notice around here, you'll see that we use the symbol of the lotus flower, and that is the symbol that the Buddha used in Buddhism to represent our practice. And the reason that is a lotus flower is a beautiful flower, considered one of the most beautiful flowers in the pantheon of flowers. However, it grows in sturdy, stagnant water. If you try to put it in clean water, it will not grow. This is us, as far as the Buddha was concerned, in that we are this amazing flower that has infinite potential, that cannot reach its highest potential without being rooted in the muck and mire of everyday life. And the thing that is unique about the lotus flower is that its petals are not stained by the muck and mire in which it lives. Very similarly, in the context of Buddhism, we are like the lotus flower in that, especially in the 21st century. If anyone's ever tried to grow a lotus in captivity, if you ordered a seed, and some of them can last 2,000 years. They had some that they grew that they found in Egypt, but the seed's really thick, and you just soak it in water, nothing happens. So you actually have to cut through the seed in order to make it susceptible for the water to get down in there. And then it has to be really pure water. You know, it can't have fluorides or anything like that, or it will not grow, and it'll swell to twice its size. But if you leave it in that water, it rots. Now, it doesn't have enough nutrients to grow. And so in Buddhism, that's who we are. Most of the people who come to Buddhism have been knocked around by life a little bit. Maybe they're a little scarred. Maybe it's the difficulty of life to make them more accessible to the idea of the cooling water of the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, to deal with these sorts of things. So this temple is like that clean water, right? But if someone only ever comes to this temple, yeah, they may swell, right, with this newfound whatever, but it's not going to grow, because this is a surrogate, right? This is a surrogate for this. The fertile ground is out there. And the only way that we can plant our seed of enlightenment or our seed of compassion is to go out there and get dirty, get down in the muck and mire, you know, and realize that what changes is the contextualization. Rather than looking at my life as, oh my God, my life is horrible. Why don't I look at it as these are the causes and conditions for my plant to reach its highest potential? You know, the crap that I have to deal with at work is fertile ground, fertile material for me to be able to grow. You discussed the ease at which sitting in a monastery, you know, nothing challenges you, right? I thought that I had it before I got married. After I got married and had a child, all of a sudden I realized, I don't got it. In fact, there's probably not a minute of the day anymore that I do think I've got anything. I'm just like humbled now. But the best teachers I have are my wife and my child.
Exactly. It's the most difficult relationships are intimate relationships, the closer you are. And the closer you are to somebody, the more past you share with them. And so when you meet a new person in the street, meeting all of you, I don't know you, we have no basis for anything, so it's much easier to be present. But if all of a sudden my father walked in, starts yelling, you know, I'm a person again. And Ram Dass was the one I said. He goes, oh, if you think you're so enlightened, go spend a week with your parents. And it's so true. People challenge us, and that's the thing, is that split that happens to human beings, it seems to have accelerated, 15, 20,000 years ago on this planet. Because humans once lived completely like animals. You can almost look at human history as when you were a baby, you didn't know you existed yet. You did, and you were conscious. You look through a baby's eyes, it's beautiful, they're clear. There's no self there yet. Even when they're about like maybe 2 years old, there's emotion. They'll cry and fight and everything else, but there's no mind yet that's going, oh, you don't look so good today. So what am I going to be when I grow up? Well, I probably won't accomplish that. But so that was humanity. We got to that point where we started thinking, and then that thinking took over, and that thinking causes so much suffering that it actually eventually erodes the ego. So human beings, they don't have the ego. They're plants, animals, they all live in unconscious oneness with life. So you could say they unconsciously know themselves as the source. And then when you start losing yourself, especially when you're like 12, 13 years old, I'm a person, and then you're separate from everybody. So you have a life. It's my life. It's no longer just life. It's my life. I can lose that life, and it might not end up the way I wanted, and so on and so forth. But then that causes immense amounts of suffering. And we have a pain body, which is it's a field of emotional energy that because every living thing is imbued with that need to survive, emotions and thoughts have that too. And as soon as you identify with an emotion and it becomes you will imbue it with the desire to survive as long as possible. And then that clumps together, and then it as if it hides for a few days. And then as soon as your loved one says the wrong thing, it comes out. And you always know it's pain body because it precedes thinking. You can have a bad day, you think, oh, blah, 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 and then you feel like, sad, and then you stop thinking, you meditate, sadness goes away. But the pain body is the sadness just comes up. There's just field of energy, and you can't hold it. And then that will jump into the mind as soon as you identify with it, and it will create thoughts that vibrate at the same frequency as that emotion. So if it's sadness, like my pain body is anger. So I get angry, immediately there's angry thoughts, and it's very fast. It's very fiery anger. Where sadness is a lot more like water. It's slow to come on. It's slow to go away. Anger, gone. And that takes over. But that pain body, if you let that suffering and you accept it, it'll actually erode the ego. It'll kill it. And that's what happens to a lot of these people. That's why even in Christianity, the sacred symbol is a man being tortured to a piece of wood. And he doesn't say, how dare these evil people do this to me? He says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So there's immense suffering, which in that time, you could almost put a man being waterboarded nowadays. And then them just, there's immense suffering, but when it's accepted, it becomes divine peace. And that shatters the ego, and then this is allowed to come through. And I believe that this is the next stage in human evolution, is that once we get through this, there's unconscious oneness with life, conscious separation, conscious individuality, or you call it unconscious individuality. And then once that causes enough suffering on the planet, especially at this time on this planet, that human beings, through the amplification of science and technology, no longer is it just people fighting with swords, but atomic bombs. And now the entire planet, the entire species is being threatened. So in our personal lives, it can be suicide. You feel you can't handle it. I want to kill myself. And then the physical body doesn't die, but you kill yourself, and the self dies. And that's what cracks the person. Well, on the planet now, as a whole collective, we may actually kill ourselves as a species. And I believe that's why this is all coming up, that there's so many people here that are waking up, is because it's an essential, it's an evolutionary impulse.
Can you speak more towards cultivating a conscious relationship with plants?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. I'm working towards it.
Okay, cool.
So with the plant,
It's just sort of blowing my mind. So when someone feels like they want to take their own life and then they don't, and they do away with their ego, is that what you were saying? Like it's a death to the ego, and then they can recreate themselves?
yeah, it seems as though, yeah, if that's, most of the time people are blessed to have a heavy burden because of people who, when they don't have enough challenges in life, you're rich, you look good, you know, everything's, they usually stay on the surface, and then the chances of them waking up aren't very likely.
Or when they hit difficult times, they don't know how to bounce back.
Exactly.
Is that what you meant by the ego? The ego dies.
Yeah.
And it cracks open. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, the suffering that's generated by the ego eventually cracks the ego.
Like the lotus seed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so once that happens and there's a conscious oneness with life, when you look at a plant and you recognize its being, what I believe is happening is that nature, in a sense, created human beings to go through this transformation for the whole planet. And that once our consciousness reaches that point where we're consciously one, when you look at the plant and you recognize its being, it gets to know itself. So it jumps from unconscious oneness to conscious oneness. And that's what's happening. And that's the relationship that's occurring. Is that when you do that on the plant, you're not there yet, so you look at the plant, unconscious oneness, then it brings you to that state. But because you're the human being and you have the ego, you go above. So you can call it, there's the below thinking, which is where plants are, and babies and animals. Your pre-thought. We go into thinking, and then thinking eventually becomes secondary. And then we rise above thinking. We can still think, but we can choose to think. And plants then can jump to that with us. And I believe that's the basis of the entire relationship that's happening. I believe even if that happens and the human race still eliminates itself, nature will have still kept the gains. Consciousness will still keep the gains that occur through human beings. And that's the whole basis of our connection with plants, is that it's just not about just going to nature and just talking about plants and talking to plants and them talking back and telling you things. It's an entire evolutionary jump that we're going through with nature. And it's essential to the survival of the human race. It's essential to the survival of the planet.
Don't you think that nature's always been there for us to learn and have that knowledge?
Yeah.
You know, walls and you throw, I mean, you know, she's talking about it.
Yeah, it was like when the first few flowers started popping up on the planet, there would only be a few, and then evolutionary conditions would just crush them, and they would die out. And then eventually, once the planet reached a certain point where the conditions were right, flowers took over the entire planet, and now they're everywhere. And that's kind of what happened with those people. You get Jesus and Buddha, so on, all waking up. Conditions weren't right, life killed them, or misunderstood them, and now conditions right now are right again. And so there's a massive flowering of consciousness happening.
That's really, does that answer any of your questions? Because I don't want to ask a question until it gets to yours.
I'm like in the very beginning, this is all really brilliant content and important as well, but in the very beginning you kind of started to speak towards your experience of cultivating
You want to talk more on that?
communion with plants.
Yeah.
And you seem to have an embodied and a conscious experience with that, and it feels like a rich thing that you could share with us about your experience of going out into the plants, what it feels like, looks like, to start to cultivate that relationship continuously, what that gives you, what you feel like that's going to give us. If you'd like us to all leave here having an understanding of how we can start embodying a conscious relationship with plants, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so the first place you have to go is inside your own body. They said, so if you root yourself in your feet, you put your conscious attention in your hands. This is what I call wiggling free. So you might be stuck right now in a particular sense perception, or stuck in the mind or anything like that. And if you start to wiggle free your consciousness by going in your hands, you can kind of, can everybody do that right now? Can you feel your hands?
I feel tingling.
Tingling, yes. Most people always feel tingling at first. Because once the consciousness, you're adding more energy.
And then when I do like this, it's stronger.
Yes. Yeah, you can almost feel the two come together. Yeah. So when you first get into your hands, there's going to be tingling, especially if you're not used to it. So you feel the tingling in the hands, and that's the hand coming alive.
Oh, and I can feel your hand wiggling.
Yeah.
Is that weird?
No, not at all. Actually, when I sit for a long enough time, especially next to I could just, and you feel it, and it's kind of like a, there's the physical matter, the body, and then there's kind of this fine layer, and in Chinese medicine, they call it qi.
Yes.
It's this very fine energy, that's the tingling that you feel. And so it's almost halfway between form and formless. So that's the gate. And when you get into your body and start to feel mind, well, then you do that with the plant. And you just feel the plant sitting there. And what this does is, in herbalism, as a practical thing for herbalists, if anybody here is one, there's a thing known as the doctrine of signatures. That's where you look at a plant, its shape kind of tells you what its use is. That's where this comes from. Because without that connection, all you're doing is just mentally, brown. But that's not how it's done. You're in your body, you take conscious breaths, and you look at the plant, and it emanates its being to you, and that emanation is a specific signature for what its use is.
Yeah, because maybe back when there was no book.
There was no books, there was no books, there was no scientific literature.
There's only so many times that you could taste it to see if it's poison.
Yeah, exactly. And even in South America, when they asked the ayahuasqueros, the shamans who work with ayahuasca, they said, how did you figure this out? There's millions of plants, and you figured out how to combine two to make this particular experience. How did you do that? And they said, well, the plants told us. And they said, what plant? What plant? Tobacco. Tobacco told us how to make ayahuasca. It was amazing. And so that's the only way people initially became herbalists, was because before the mind took over too, like I said, people lived in unconscious oneness with life, and so it was easy. You connect with the plants just, this is what I'm for, and then they did it. And now we want to separate everything and isolate everything, and that's why we take willow bark and turn it into aspirin. Because, okay, well, that's too confusing. There's too many compounds in that plant. How can we know what's doing what? Because the mind wants to understand, wants to control every little thing that it can't understand synergy. Because it wants to know. I have to know what this is for and what this does. I need to know what my life's for, what this does, instead of just allowing it to be and living it, because the life is so much bigger than that. So when you're connecting in your body, it's hard, especially if you talk to somebody. So you practice when you're out in nature. You practice sitting with rocks, practice sitting with plants, and you get in your body. And eventually you get to a point where you may be able to stay in your body when you talk to another human being. And when you're in your inner body, you keep going, and you keep going into it more and more, and eventually you're going to feel all the pain you have. You have a hip problem, you weren't feeling it before, you're going to start feeling it. So it's going to kind of, oh, I don't want to be in there, and try and get back in the head, right? So
We call that Mara.
is that what it is?
Desire.
Yeah.
It's that thing that keeps you from being able to focus. It's, oh, my back hurts. Oh, look at the clouds. Those are pretty.
Yeah, and the pain by that emotional energy, because when it's not felt fully, it can become physical illness. When you first get into the body, you might actually feel sick. You might feel sick to your stomach. You might start actually having random pains. You might feel little things start vibrating in your body, and you're just like, what is that? And it's stuff just getting situated. It's harmony being returned to the body when you bring consciousness to the body. Because the cell that's in my finger is not the same as the cell that's over here, but through consciousness, the one consciousness that knows, okay, I have feet, and you're not thinking I have feet, but a good exercise is if you close your eyes, you hold your hand out, and you ask yourself, how do I know I have a hand? Without feeling anything, without touching anything, and without the concept of, well, of course I have a hand. How do you know that you have a hand? And immediately you can feel that'll take you right into the hand. You feel the hand that you're holding up a lot more when you do that? And so, okay, now you do that. Now do your feet. And you can close your eyes and you can just do the whole, how do I know I exist? Without any thoughts, how do I know I exist? And immediately, oh, there's a body there. That's the only way.
So does the plant do that too?
Yeah, the plant's it does that without thinking, much like when you were a baby, you didn't know. You just work. There's not enough consciousness coming through that physical organism to then reflect back to itself yet. It's primordial. It's a primordial state of consciousness that they live in. And so when you keep going into that feeling and you just close your eyes and how do I exist, you'll start to feel this really deep spaciousness deep inside the body that's infinite. You can feel that it has no end. And if you go into that, the body can actually dissolve. I don't want to go too much into like a possible state, but you can get to a place where there's actually just consciousness, and all you feel is just the bliss of being without being a person.
It's in some ways, you brought up ayahuasca and other plant medicine as far as that goes. And, I think some of those. And I think some of that is, we can talk offline about that. Do you think that's a lot of ways that the plants, the world itself is trying to wake each of us up?
Yeah. I don't find it a coincidence that ayahuasca's been around for thousands of years, and now all of a sudden it's popular than ever.
Right.
And it's a plant that when you do ingest those two plants together, some kind of DMT containing plant, and BCAFI, in my experience, it completely eliminated the world. I don't want to talk too much about my experience with psychedelic plants. But they kind of, that's their purpose. But it's not necessary. You don't need to use them. You can have these experiences without it. I woke up before I haven't tried any of those. Not fully, I'm not an enlightened master. But I had the realization, I had the glimpse. I think there's a term for that in Buddhism too. Satori, yeah, where it's a quick glance into what it is, and then it's gone.
It's not. And then if you cling to it, it becomes something.
Exactly.
Poisonous.
Yeah, exactly. And then that itself can become an identity that then is your own ego. So I'm the enlightened person. That's how you relate with the world. And so when you do these plants, though, I believe that that's what it is you're, rather than just having to sit here with a plant, when you ingest a plant, you're ingesting that state of consciousness. And this ties into the whole new food movements where everybody, wants their food to not be, a suffer of genocide before it is eaten. Yeah, we want things that were happy and joyful and, so on and so forth. And then I believe a big help is if you go out in the forest and you eat wild dandelions, and you chew on some lemon balm, and that you've taken that state of consciousness with the herb. So when you eat the good foods and all of that, it really helps. And I know that was the main topic of these talks was supposed to be how one good choice in your life creates another good choice. You start eating right, and you start exercising. Yeah, exactly. And then you keep going through that. And I think that's what this is. You take the herb, you eat the good food, it helps you ground yourself, and you ingest that original state of consciousness into your body. Then it becomes part of your body, and then you can keep accessing it easier and easier and easier. And it's more important at the beginning stages of awakening to eat good, in my opinion. So once you're rooted, you can kind of play around with it. Some of the old people, some old philosophers and masters, they would force their students to drink alcohol to see how conscious they would stay, which is not a good practice in my opinion. But it's funny because the more conscious you do become, the more you can get drunk and yet you're there.
Well,
but you don't like it very much.
Even in the context of my lineage, Japanese history, there are times when you might, your master might take you out. Because now you've gotten so good at masking who you are and all of your things, and you know what to expect, and I know how to be a good boy and all of these things. But then you get a little inebriated and such, and all of a sudden the other person comes out. And all of a sudden these things that you had that were so tightly guarded aren't as tightly guarded.
It's like being in a cave and then not in a cave.
Exactly.
Reference to Plato and such.
Right.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. The alcohol. One drink will kind of loosen the ego up. And you okay. Feel a little better, and the mind subsides a little bit. And then 2 drinks, a little more. Once you get to 3 drinks, you start literally going below thought.
My mom points at the bottle and say, it's nice and quiet in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the few times people go below thought is you take certain drugs, usually prescription painkillers or, so on and so forth. Cannabis makes the mind more active, which is funny. So it kind of puts you in the ego rather than taking you out of it or under it. But alcohol puts you down. And right before you go to bed at night, right when you wake up, there's that moment where you're not quite aware yet to know your problems anymore. And that's a close time. Yeah.
It's deadening. I mean, that's we call them intoxicants of the mind.
Exactly. Yeah. But these entheogens, what they do is they seem to just immediately cause ego death. And that's the fascinating part is things like salvia and ayahuasca will literally take you out of your body and remind you that you're consciousness, even without a human body.
It's almost like it takes the ego here, so you can look at it like a little bit outside of that. You're still aware of it. You're still going to come back.
Right.
But it's like that different perspective that's really hard to get in a normal waking state. You do a lot of introspection, but then it's like, whoa.
Exactly.
So lots of things theoretically are possible. One of the things that I think that all of these things do is that they're reminding you of the separation, right? So the taking yourself and stepping away and seeing that there's just the process of meditation that's happening, not connecting to it per se. There's fast ways to it, like through ayahuasca and such like that. There's longer ways through meditation. I've seen people that haven't meditated much who come to great satori. But again, regardless of what you came to, you have to take that back into the world.
Right.
So you can go to the mountain, have the most amazing vision of the world, like you described with the monk. But it's how do you bring that back and put that seed in the fertile ground of everyday life? Right? Because otherwise it's just another illusion. It's just another fiction. It's just like a book you read. doesn't really exist, nor does the person who experienced it exist anymore because they existed in that time and that moment. Now you're not in that time and not in that moment.
So it's like a dream.
Exactly. And if you cling to the dream too much, if you cling to the hallucination, or you cling to the satori, or you cling to your fictional view of how you think the world should be, that's when suffering arises. So that thing that you felt freed you may be the thing that changed you if you hold on to it too tightly.
So, you know, I have friends that have done ayahuasca and have done a lot of reading on it. It's not something I would choose to do. And probably one of the reasons why is you usually feel like you've been run over by an 18-wheeler for 3 days after. So, you know, is the plant trying to say, you know, like, there's more to it than, you know, you have a trip, you know, a hallucination, a dream, you know, you go to another place. But afterwards, you feel horrible.
I wouldn't say horrible.
Well, I've had friends that in their perception.
Either way, we don't have to worry about the hallucinogenic aspect.
Exactly.
What is important is that the place that you come to in that process, not the plant per se.
Right.
So whether or not you access it through a plant, or whether or not you access it through a style of meditation, or a style of focus, or mindfulness, or whatever, I think that's the thing that's important. So we don't get too caught up in, you know, hallucinating on drugs.
Well, I want to land on just one last thing, and then we'll end it. It's about time. So.
And I want to make sure you get
I'll do
the
I know.
background of questions and all that.
Yeah. Everybody here was able to feel the hands. That's the best thing that you can do. It really is. You can go to a million spiritual sermons, take, you know, what are they called, intensives, and so on and so forth. But just
or drugs, you know,
or drugs and all that.
Gets
Yeah,
you to this point that
exactly.
you're talking about right now.
But just being in the body and being connected while you're in nature. And for me, it's very tough because I'm, what's that one? What's that for? What's that for? But you have to at least connect to the plant as a living being first.
You have a good thing. Your gut connections, you keep turning to look at it as if it's talking to you.
It's amazing. It just sits there and it's beautiful.
You notice that too? Like it distracts him and he has to look at it? Did you notice that?
Yeah. I get very
So
distracted.
you've inspired all
Thank
sorts
you.
of other things. Say what you're not doing
Oh, okay,
anymore.
okay.
So what I would like to do with all of you here is invite you to the next talk that I'm going to ask him to do. I would
wasn't
like
sure
you
if I
to.
was welcome back.
I would
like.
I'd like you to bring a plant, and I'd like to have a communal discussion where you teach us how to actually do the physical activity
Yes.
of connecting with the plant,
Yeah.
and then get responses from the participants. Because when you gave the talk, I think it was dandelions at the conference.
Yeah, it was a similar talk to
It was
this.
a journey. It was the whole process of like how to actually do it, and I felt like a dandelion by the end of it. And I just, I want to see if we can pick a plant and do that. And
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think what we could do is I could bring in a lemon balm plant.
Okay.
And I can bring in. Are we allowed to bring tincturing alcohol?
Sure.
Okay, so I can bring in a little bit of like 40 or 50% alcohol, and we can sit with the lemon balm plant, and we can, you know, I'll pass around a few leaves, and everybody can smell it, and then I'll actually teach you guys while we all sit and be in the body, though, how to make a lemon balm tincture. Awesome. And what parts to use, how much to use, and how to use it, what it's actually used for medicinally. And you'll see that plant everywhere around here. So when you go to the forest, you're gonna find lemon balm.
And this being in the body, that's what I was trying to say, is the most important thing. So it doesn't require a religion, it doesn't require spirituality, it doesn't require anyone to teach you how to do it. It is the thing that the Buddha did, and those that came before the Buddha, and those that have come since the Buddha, is to sit and be with your body. And what he said is exactly Buddhism. It doesn't matter to me if it's Buddhism or not.
Exactly.
We have another speaker, our next speaker, just so I can piggyback. Becky. Okay, so Becky, maybe we have another.
We have a couple ideas in the works. We have someone who would like to do a talk on joy, and how to feel joy in your body with yoga. And then we have someone who would like to do a talk on community, actual tea, and how the
And we'll blend it
drinking
together
tea
as
can
a
be
community.
communal, and so that, you know, it is a tradition in many different cultures, but it's not something that as Americans we naturally like get together and like have a cup of tea or do like
That would be
Japanese
great,
tea
too. I
ceremony.
think you could bring in a little,
And both
my
these
lemon
people are
balm.
herbalists and you probably do.
Oh, okay, I know, yeah.
So it's Becky and such, but so, you know, we'll bring in herbs and we'll all make a blended tea that is made during that session, and then we'll.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, so we're gonna turn the video off because we're doing this on YouTube.
Oh, awesome.
And
Oh, that's perfect.
Some of the audio didn't go.
it's
I got it, yeah.
on. You might want, if you want to re-listen to the second half or whatever, you might, you know, enjoy that. You're welcome to hang around for a little while and have private conversation.